Hello, welcome to the Subscribe blog, a new episode with Vittorio Bertocci from Italy.
At your service.
Yes, and I'm saying that because you can't deny it.
No, yeah, well, from my accent you might think I'm from Ireland or, I don't know, South Africa perhaps, but yeah, I'm actually Italian.
So Vittorio is in our identity group. He's also the most skilled presenter with the tablet.
Yeah, fatto kind.
And also amongst the best ones that we have in the company.
Yeah, again, fatto kind.
Yes, and even though he talks about some usually very obscure topics.
What are you talking about? Obscure topics. Canonicalization, encryption, those are like straightforward
identity.
things, right?
So you are in the big group that owns Active Directory.
That is correct.
Specifically also the new wonderful things of Windows Azure Active Directory.
That
and
is
of course,
also correct.
it has the name Active Directory.
Yep.
And so everybody thinks it's the same thing. So I'll ask a stupid question.
Go ahead.
How do I domain join a machine to Windows Azure Active Directory in the sky?
Fantastic, great. This is a question that, as you mentioned, we get most of the time because since this is called Active Directory, people often relate to that according to their experience. Well, the interesting thing is that the answer to your question is like 42. As Windows Azure Active Directory is Active Directory. However, it is reimagined for cloud-based workloads.
Okay.
As a result, it does the things that you need to do when you're writing a cloud application really, really well at scale and as a platform as a service offering. So in other words, it doesn't really rely on any infrastructure information as you would normally when you would do things like domain join a machine in which you are like living pretty low in the ISOs stack. But instead it takes the things that you need to do for writing a cloud application and gives that to you with no imposition about the machinery that is behind the scenes.
Because Active Directory, as we know it from the server, is this big bag of magic that you turn it on the server and then it turns the server into something that's completely different, but then magically you show up with a machine on the network and it's there.
Correct. Yes, and it can do that mostly because it has these, superpowers. Let's say that the moment in which you share the same infrastructure, the moment in which you can rely on that infrastructure to be there, then yeah, it can do everything. And so, literally, if you want to exist in the network, you have to go through the Active Directory, I'd say, imprimatur. I don't know if you can say that in English. However, when you go in the cloud, of course, all those assumptions are no longer true.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that at that point you might have or not have an on-premise property. It doesn't really matter. But even if you do, this thing is like decoupled from the resource that you're going to call. And this is both from the physical perspective. Let's say that there are boundaries, there are many routers and network hardware between you and the resource that you're calling. But there are often also organizational boundaries. Let's say that you might be buying a SaaS application which is run by somebody else, and you don't need to know the details of where they are running it, on which platform they're running it, which stack they used, their IP address masks. You don't care about any of that stuff. You just want to access that resource securely.
So let me ask another somewhat stupid sounding seeming question. I think so Active Directory or Active Directory is something that is probably, even though it's pervasive, something that as an application component, as a resource for apps, is something that's not necessarily all that common, I think, as something that developers think about. Because the Active Directory kind of has been the Jedi realm of IT pros, where people who are building applications or installing applications, even running them, have kind of been kept away from, because Active Directory is the holy grail of privacy, and you can't get at it because there's, oh my God, the people that we have. So apps not necessarily have the privilege of actually interacting with that information. So you end up with these buckets of data, which are replicated in each app, like the notion of an account, the notion of information associated with a person. So let's assume that most of the developers have no idea what Active Directory in depth actually means. So what is it?
That's great. So do you want to talk about the traditional on-prem Active Directory, or do you want to talk about the Windows Azure Active Directory?
The Windows Azure Active Directory as a reimagination of that Ch9 master.
Great. And in fact, it's good that developers might not have been exposed to the nitty-gritty details of the on-prem directory, because thanks to the fact that we are platform as a service, we don't really need to know any of those details. Right now, it's pure capability. So before I mentioned that Windows Azure Active Directory focuses on the workloads that you have for cloud applications. So what are those workloads? There are largely two. One is sheer authentication. I already have users somewhere, like for example on-prem, or I have them in a place where I want to share it across multiple applications, and I want to take advantage of that capability. And this is the classic problem that we've been solving using claims-based identity. However, with Windows Azure Active Directory, we'll go one step further. If you ever use the claims-based identity, you know that it is largely a contract between various parties in which it says, okay, when I see somebody who is not authenticated, I will contact this authority using this specific syntax, and I will expect a reply in this other specific syntax. And all these transcend the details of if you're running on Sun or, well, that shows my age, Sun. Okay, but it doesn't matter where you're running. Like as long as you stick with the contract, everything works. And that's great, but there's a huge step forward in respect to the past in which you had to go to dinner with the administrator and say, okay, here is the record, and by the way, I'm using Little Endian, you're using Big Endian, so remember to swap stuff. Like, all that stuff is gone. Now, everything is easier. However, it is still not, how to say, industry scale. Like, the main problem here is that even if we follow a contract, everybody can always have some latitude about what they do. Let's say that in my case, I might send you claims that are all in Italian, like the types might be in Italian. And so you, as the administrator of a resource that needs to receive those claims, you need to connect it to my specific instance of my identity provider. You need to know the list of claims that I have. You need to know the key that I'm going to use for signing this stuff. So we give you tools, so it's much better than in the past, but it's still something that happens pretty much in a one-to-one basis. However, imagine that you are an ISV, you have your SaaS application, and you want the sign up to be completely seamless. You want somebody to come, do a couple of clicks, and ta-da, they are your customer. And of course, this ceremony is not really compatible with that. Now, the idea of a Windows Azure Active Directory is that we still leverage those open protocols. So you still have the advantage of owning your own identity provider if you want, running on whatever platform you want. However, now there is this central point which facades the details. And so at that point, once you register it, like once you have what we call a directory tenant in Windows Azure Active Directory, then for an ISV that wants to write an application that needs to do single sign-on with your own directory, then there is basically the same flow that you would have for Farmville in Facebook, in which the developer can write an application and inject in the top a link which is specific to the app. And then you, as the prospect customer and administrator of one tenant, you can just follow that link. You will end up on the Windows Azure portal. You'll sign in. Then the portal will know that you are the administrator of a directory. You will be presented with a dialog which says, application X would like to access your directory with these levels, sign on, read or read write, and similar, and a big button saying, do you consent or you do deny?
So wait. So you went and made the thing that usually happens, Facebook, on the user permission level. You kind of took that a whole step further, and you say, "Oh, do you want to allow that federation to happen?"
Yep. So basically,
That's
the idea is that in OAuth, if you look at the spec, the idea is that the owner of a resource that consent the application to access
And
that resource.
that resource might quite well be the entire
Exactly.
directory.
Like the administrator is the one that decides, can this application do single sign-on, like obtain tokens for my users? And once they say yes, that's it. Like you don't need to go again and ask the user. Now, I'm not saying that we'll never add anything that works at the user level. I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't say the future, because otherwise, whoop, somebody comes and cuts my hair. But let's say that for the time being, from a business perspective, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Let's say that this is the perfect equivalent of your administrator saying, you know what, from now on, let's use Office 365. So they go and they buy, and then all the users take advantage of it.
So that's the obvious part of. So there's authentication where you now effectively allow federation and sharing of, establishing a trust between different organizations, effectively.
Yes.
And just federate that through the Active Directory in the sky.
But actually, sorry, let me just close on the thought in there. Once the administrator says grant, from that moment on, it just enabled single sign-on with all the users. And I know you got it, but I just want to make sure that our fantastic audience gets this point.
Yes, yes.
So now the onboarding is completely seamless. Let's say that if you have your app, if you have your onboarding flow in which your customer pays for the subscription or whatever else, now adding single sign-on is just clicking one button. You no longer need to go to dinner with administrator. So in terms of like reach, it's really like a quantum leap.
So from my personal perspective, as someone who works at Microsoft, and we have a lot of that technology already in place, obviously. There are a number of external services that I use which don't seem external to me, but they are really external to the company, in the sense that, so I think my Outlook account and my Link account they're in shared infrastructure. They're just out there in Office 365, and they are not Microsoft IT owned, but they're actually run by Office 365, and so they're not corporate resources. They're just resources that are sitting out there in the cloud. Yet, I go and do the 3-finger salute, or now I swipe the finger, or do whatever I do. Oh no, I make some swipies over a picture. And so I'm now in the context of my machine, and it just magically happens that I can go and get to those resources because my Active Directory account there's some Jedi motions that are happening, so that other thing can go and understand it. So I assume the way this works is that I show up, and then that thing knows where I'm from, and then goes to my security infrastructure, where I then magically, through SSO and through all the magic that's in the operating system, then go, it says, yes, that's right, sends a token over there, and then lets me in.
That is exactly what happens, and in fact, Office 365 is completely based on Windows Azure Active Directory, so it is not like it is exactly the same, it's just one instance. And I wouldn't go as far as saying that IT does not own it. IT is still the custodian of that. Let's say that our good friend Brian Poole, which is like our prototypical IT person here in Microsoft, is the one that said, yes, Office 365 can work for the Microsoft.com domain. And then the magic in there, actually, once you discover the trick, it kind of loses some of its charm. Because it's pretty much, you write outlook.com/your tenant, Microsoft.com, and then at that point, the system hits the Windows Azure Active Directory authentication endpoint. It sees that that tenant is what we call a federated tenant. Let's say one that has a corresponding endpoint on-premise. You might be a cloud-only case in which you just do authentication there. Mm-hmm. But since we are in that case, and since if you are here, you are behind the proxy, so the DNS will resolve to the internal endpoint, then you get redirected to that local endpoint. Kerberos is already in place, so you're already authenticated. So you get back your token gets back to that endpoint says, yes, that's Clemens. And there you go, all the mail. So that's really nice. Like the mechanic is the same as the classic EFS. The thing that makes this really, really smooth is that having this central point makes for Brian like this a no-brainer. Like he has just to click that button and it's done.
So when we say central point, however, that doesn't mean central point in the sense of central points as it is the fear of every on-premises Active Directory and directory administrator of the domain controller getting hosed, because that's a different thing.
It is a completely different thing. Like this thing is designed to be used for really, really high-scale applications. And now I don't remember the numbers on top of my head, so I don't want to say the wrong ones, but I guess we can provide them in the links. The numbers of logins that we've been handling from Windows Azure AD is absolutely mind-boggling.
And I can go into if I could go into the data center, which will not happen because I will get shot before I try. But if I could go in, I could taser one of the machines and nothing would happen because we're building that as a failover of.
Absolutely, that stuff is like I can't say it's the largest scale operation that we have because I don't know, but it is like. Yes.
Everybody who's using Office 365
is hitting on that
comes through that, and another set of additional services are kind of also federated that way.
Yes.
I mean, for me, it's astonishing. As a Microsoft employee, that's something you can't see, obviously. Is there's an enormous number of services where all of a sudden it's like, whoop, use your corporate login. Yeah, really? How does that work? So. We have a lot of those. So beyond this,
so there's the second workload.
Exactly.
The second workload is something that instead we had no solution apart your fantastic relay, which I do actually mention in my sessions very often, saying, "Oh well, we want respect to Clemens and his relay." So here there's how it goes. Many of those applications, many of business-based applications. Just to say, user authentication as the beginning of their flow, of course. Mm-hmm. However, besides recognizing the current user, as a part of a business function that they provide, they have the need to get insights about what's in your directory.
Yes.
So imagine like the most classic expense app or issue management app in which you need to take things and assign them to your colleagues. Mm-hmm. So the token that you receive at the authentication time contains things that describe your own user, but it doesn't really go that far in the rest of the adjacent objects in the directory. So the idea is that your application should be able to somehow reach out and reach back to the directory and do queries of effect of which groups do you belong to if I didn't receive it. If you are a manager, who are your people? And now that I know who are those people, I need to query on them and percolate further through the graph to find more info. Like for example, I want to know which ones are with less load right now so that I will automatically assign this new task to the guy which is the lightest.
So it is the metadata store for your organization, basically.
Right, it's like, it's truly the directory. Like from the, forgetting for a moment about how it is implemented, from a functional perspective, this is literally your directory. The directory holds information about how your organization functions, your assets, your users, which are your assets, and the way in which they relate to each other, and applications which perform business functions must have the chance to query that information. Otherwise, they will be not as effective. And this is a classic problem because mostly that means that today, people have to do unnatural things, like, for example, take periodic snapshots of their current situation and then upload them, like as a CSV file or stuff like that, to the ISV, and then the application will use this thing to present, I'd say, the situation as current as they can, but of course, that's a chore, that's a danger, because every time you send all your stuff, it could be intercepted. It's not up to date. It's suboptimal.
So when I think about this as a tree of metadata about the organization, which has all the aspects, probably a graph more than a tree. So that's now an open API that I can call over presumably HTTP.
Yes.
That which is far more convenient for applications than the somewhat obscure other models of using LDAP or
exactly.
whatever.
Like you jumped right to the conclusion.
Yes.
Like what I just presented was the need, the way in which we solved this for Office 365 And in the end, for pretty much everybody that uses the directory, is to project the information, the relevant information that you have on premise, to your Windows Azure Active Directory tenant. And then at that point, we exposed a data head, an API on top of this, which allows you to query and modify those items just by using sheer HTTP.
So you get effectively you get a structured metadata store that is part of that directory, and then applications can go and share that. So I assume because you're in the authorization business there, that the data that's there can then also be secured by.
Yes, this is of course you zero on the main concern of people. So the advantage of doing this in 2013 as opposed to then in 2002, for example, is that the industry already progressed toward the point in which this idea of granting permissions, delegating access to disconnected and decoupled entities is already completely mainstream. So the moment in which the administrator says, yes, I want this application to be able to access my directory, they can specify how deep they can go down the rabbit hole. If they say just SSO, then that's all the application can do. And to say that the moment in which the app tries to reach back to the graph, it will receive a sorry, no bonus answer. If they receive a read access, that means that the application can use an off client credential flow to obtain a token, and then use that token to just do REST calls to this endpoint and make reads to this structure. And then there are all the goodness of data, like your metadata, you have paging, and we have also some extra goodness of our own, like there is one thing called the differential query, in which you can make a query, get back results, and a cookie. And then the next time you do the same query, you attach the cookie, and then we check that cookie and we send you only the data. So that if you have like a sizable company and you need to keep your application fresh every single time to get like tens of thousands of users. And of course, the moment in which you try to write, if your token did not grant you the ability to write, then it won't work. So the idea is that the administrator remains fully in control about what the application can do. However, when the administrator is okay with the app actually performing this function, then it's very easy for them to do, both for the developer to take advantage of this and for the administrator to onboard it.
So, kind of as the last question, so when I use this for applications that are sitting in the cloud in Windows Azure, you have an. Let's assume you have an existing Active Directory, but you really don't have to have one. You can start one fresh.
Absolutely, correct.
But you have an existing one, so the metadata that you have there will flow up, and you can go project it out, and you'll have it here, and then you can effectively use your cloud applications can use it. So that sets you up for a hybrid application, effectively, which can all base it on the same metadata. Is it feasible that you use, other than having the infrastructure, I mean, there's infrastructure stuff where you have to create a network of trust of your machines, effectively. That's what the domain join stuff does on premises. But is it feasible for you to use that as your primary way of dealing with user identities?
That is largely depending on what you want to do. Like if you are, I don't know, a boutique firm in which you have employees in Austria and others in Bangladesh, and you have no on-premise, then yeah, absolutely. Let's say that now you have a central place where you can have all your users, you can assign them roles, you can do all the things that you would normally do with a directory, and have those available for, I would say, off-premise applications. It just works.
So I would assume that kind of starts to root in Office 365.
It can, but you can also start on your own. Like you get your Windows Azure subscription, with it you get your directory. So if you have also Office 365, that's the same directory. But if you wanted to have a directory and not have Office 365, absolutely.
So if I start in Office 365, this is like my first entry into this, where I'm let's say I'm a consulting company, I'm helping smaller companies, and they set, because the customers directly will probably not watch this. At least they will have lost us by now. So I'm a consulting company. I'm helping smaller companies, and they start with Office 365 as the thing to set up their enterprise. And so they get an Active Directory with that automatically. So
Yes.
what happens, and then I can go and that Active Directory that I started with, that is something that I can then further use for other things, or is that specific?
Absolutely. Yes.
So it's not specific to
Not
Office
specific, not specific. Like Office 365, like Windows Azure or Windows Intune, are just, routes for which you obtain a directory. But once you have a directory, you can use it for whatever purposes you deem fit. Like those endpoints are in there, as long as the applications that try to use those endpoints are registered, everything works.
And then so let's say I start there. Can I then go and effectively touch down and kind of have if the need evolves, have an on-premises server and then get that pull the identities down?
It doesn't go in the opposite direction.
Okay.
Like, for the time being, this thing is or cloud native, like cloud only, or it gets a projection of what you have on premise.
Okay.
But this allows you to, for example, have groups that live only in the cloud but not on prem. So you can, make a differentiation depending on the zones and similar.
But
again,
I would say that someone who starts in the cloud stays there.
usually, yeah, that would be my impression as well. But it's fair to think that that might not always be the case. But again, crystal balls here. Maybe
Yes.
eventually
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
other flow might work. Also, one thing that we don't do today is to synchronize the credentials. Like today, if you want to have an on-prem base and your Windows Azure AD tenant, when you do authentication, you always go back to your on-prem, which has advantages because at this point, the
But if you
moment in
can't
which
see it, then
yes, it wouldn't work. That's the main problem. But there are two problems. There were two problems, two, I would say, drawbacks. The thing that you gain is that, of course, the advantage of federation. The moment in which I deprovision somebody, instantly out of everything. I don't need to wait for
Yes.
sync to take place and similar. And the things that are instead not completely straightforward is that if on-prem is unavailable, of course, that's unavailable, so no token, no bonus. And the other is that you have, if you don't already have your identity provider, you have to set one up, which is not always, it's not especially difficult. Like I'm not an IT pro and I can do it, so that means that pretty much everybody can do it. But still, it's an extra step, and so we are considering ways of mitigating this.
great. Well, thank you, Vittorio.
Thank you for having me.
That was very, very interesting. I learned new things about that I didn't know about Active Directory in the cloud.
I'm delighted to be of service.
Yes, and I hope you like that too. And
Lovely.
and you'll see me and probably Vittorio sometime in the future again on this blog. Bye.